Welcome everyone to the Communities of Excellence, Idaho's Charter Schools Program Grant. It is our CSP application introductory charter school training. We are not joined by Terry Ryan. He is off site at the moment. We do have Mark Garagnon, our CFO, and myself, Amy Felton-Toth. We also have Ray Crowell, who's going to be doing some reading for us at the beginning. And we have Kristen McCarver, who is helping us get our slideshow and our tech all up and running, helping us out. We do have the chat box open, so feel free to type in any questions as we go. Participants are muted. As we've said, welcome to the new folks that just joined us. I see Renee and Max. So please just type your questions into the chat box. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Again, our contact information, as always, is grantcsp@bloom.org or financecsp@bloom.org. Next slide. So I'm doing the introduction right now. I'm going to be joined by Ray Crowell momentarily. He's our Chief Innovation Officer at Bloom. He'll be reading some federal language that is mandatory as we're presenting this information to you. As I said, Terry is off site, so I'll be giving the CSP overview. Mark's going to give some grant logistics, again, back with me, giving some information about technical assistance and what eligible applicants are and what peer reviewers look for. We'll talk a little bit about the partners in our CSP consortium, and then a timeline reminder. And then we'll be, like I said, we'll be answering questions as we go, as we can, in the chat box, and then we'll have time at the end again if there are extended questions. So again, applications are due Friday, May 13th at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So if you find yourself in Pacific time zone, it's due 5 p.m. Mountain time zone. For resources for questions, program questions are directed to Terry Ryan, the project director for CSP, who is our CEO. Fiscal or budget questions go to Mark Garagnon, our CFO. And then RFA specific questions go to me, as I'm the Director of Federal Grants and Support for Bloom. You can also be assured that I'm monitoring those email addresses to make sure that we answer your questions in a timely fashion. And then, general information is available on the web. I'm sure you guys have all been out there. I don't think we have anyone that's super new to this process on the call. So you guys are already familiar with a lot of this stuff. So Ray, are you going to take it away and read some really juicy, exciting federal language for us?
Happy to. There's nothing better than reading from the slides, but we all who have been doing this, especially things that have any kind of federal relationship, know that you need to be pretty verbatim with how you're communicating these things. So, Idaho's Communities of Excellence Program. This is a competitive public charter school grant program funded under Congressional Every Student Succeeds Act, Public Law 114-95, which reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965. A public charter school is non-sectarian in its programs, admission policies, employment practices, and all other operations, and is not affiliated with a sectarian school or religious institution. Public charter schools are open to all students who apply and cannot charge tuition. A charter school receiving CSP funds must use a lottery if more students apply for admissions to the charter school than can be admitted.
I'm going to add one quick thing here that we learned along the way for all you Idaho charters. The prohibition of charging tuition even applies if you are, while you're getting your CSP grant, you may not charge out-of-state tuition for out-of-state students, even though the state provides a mechanism for doing so. That would violate this specific rule. A little quirk we found out as we were doing this. So just so you know, you cannot charge tuition, nor if you're receiving the federal CSP grant, can you charge tuition for half-day kindergarten, as was often a practice in the past before the funding increased in Idaho. Thank you.
Background Part 1, authorized by Title V, Part B, Subpart 1 of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. The Federal Charter Schools program provides funding to state entities with the purpose to expand opportunities for all students, particularly traditionally underserved students, to attend public charter schools and meet challenging state academic standards, provide financial assistance for the planning, program design, and initial implementation of charter schools, increase the number of high-quality charter schools available to students across the United States, evaluate the impact of charter schools on student achievement, families, and communities, share best practices between charter schools and other public schools, encourage states to provide facility support to charter schools and other public schools, encourage the states to provide facility support to charter schools, and support efforts to strengthen the charter schools authorizing process. Part 2. The CSP state entities program provides financial assistance to state entities to support charter schools that serve elementary and secondary school students in any given state. Under the program, recipient state entities make subgrants to eligible applicants for the purpose of opening new public charter schools and replicating and expanding high-quality public charter schools. Grant funds may also be used to provide technical assistance to eligible applicants and authorized public chartering agencies in opening new charter schools and replicating and expanding high-quality charter schools, and to work with authorized public chartering agencies to improve authorizing quality, including developing capacity for and conducting fiscal oversight and auditing of charter schools. Public charter schools receiving subgrant funds under the CSP state entities program may also serve students in early childhood education programs or post-secondary students.
Thank you, Ray. That was absolutely fabulous.
Riveting.
All right, so I'm playing the part of Terry today. He's unable to join us. He says hello to everyone, even though he's not here. And I'll give you the CSP overview. Next slide. So the CSP is funded under ESSA, as Ray just so eloquently described. It enables subgrants to open and prepare for the operation of new high-quality public charter schools and replicate and expand high-quality public charter schools. So our 2018 CSP competition that Bloom applied for, there were $400 million in funds where we competed against other states for that funding. 8 states won: Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, ourselves, Delaware, Michigan, New York, and North Carolina. And so these are the award amounts, the initial award amount that we received, and then we received a bump in our funding as their funding became available. So we applied for that additional funding, and so the total is roughly $22 million over 5 years. So that started when we were awarded in 2018. So we'll be closing the grant out in September of 2023, which seems much closer now than when we started the grant. So our grant objectives that we identified as our grant project goals in our narrative to the U.S. Department of Education is to increase the number of quality charter school seats, especially for our most educationally disadvantaged, as Ray alluded to in his narrative, support the PCSC in expanding its quality authorizing efforts while disseminating and supporting best practice for other authorizers statewide, and evaluating and disseminating widely the successes and lessons of the high quality charter schools that are impacting the broader education system, especially in Idaho. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to cut over to Mark, who's going to talk a little bit about grant logistics. Thanks, Mark.
So of the $22.5 million that we received, we're spending 90%, actually a little more than 90%, on subgrants to eligible applicants. We are required to spend about at least 7% on what's called technical assistance. And we've been providing that technical assistance in quite a variety of ways. And no more than 3% goes to administration. And I think when we're done, our percentage for Bloom will be less than 2% charge for admin. We decided from the beginning that any time that Terry or I put into the program, will not be charged to the grant. That's all subsidized by the Albertsons Family Foundation. Next slide. So the way that we designed the grant is that if a school is adding more than 450 seats, they may apply for up to $1.25 million. If a school is adding less than 450 seats, the school may apply for up to $800,000. Expansion or replication schools, if you're already have a school in place and you are applying to replicate or expand an existing school, you must add at least 250 seats to qualify for a grant. So an example is one of the schools that applied about a year and a half ago was Idaho Arts, and they applied to increase their seats by over 250 from their original plan. The subgrant period can't exceed 18 months for planning, and planning means days, 18 months before the first day of school, basically, is your best way to understand that. And you may not spend money more than 24 months for implementation, which is basically the day the school opens forward. For this round, because we're getting to the end of our federal CSP program in Idaho, the funds, you don't get 24 months or 18 months. All the funds must be spent by September 30th, 2023. Like all federal programs, you have about 90 days to liquidate those expenses, but you must have incurred those expenses, received the goods, been in receipt of everything you were purchasing by September 30, 2023, and then you can do your reimbursement request in October, November. And that's a hard date for us because that's when our grant ends. Next slide. There's a whole bunch of allowable activities, and we have an allowable cost guide that we refer you to cover more of these allowable activities, because we're just going to cover kind of the basics here. But a lot of schools so far in our cohorts have been using the money to prepare teachers, school leaders, provide specialized instructional support personnel. It can be professional development, hiring people early before the school opens to help plan. That could be teachers, school leaders, can be paraprofessionals, can be your future board clerk, your future front office staff, registrar, etc. A lot of the money has gone out in this second category, which is acquiring supplies, training, equipment, including technology, educational materials, which can be either buying the instructional materials, preparing the instructional materials, developing. There's a lot, it's a pretty broad swath. Next slide. Then it gets a little trickier. There are allowable uses that have to do with carrying out necessary renovations to ensure a new school building complies with applicable statutes and regulations. So this is not for new construction. You can't say, well, we're going to buy a new building and it needs sprinklers, and we're going to put the sprinklers in the cost of CSP. But it does mean that if you're leasing a building or you're buying an existing building that needs to be adjusted to meet code, sprinklers being the one that always comes up because it's one of the real expensive parts of conforming either a leased building or a newly bought like office building. If those costs are necessary to meet code and you can provide the proper trail of documentation, you can put some of those costs into the CSP grant. D is another really important one for startup schools. Providing one-time startup costs associated with providing transportation to students. There's tons of restrictions around this, but an example of the successful use of those funds is Cardinal Academy during its startup phase and its before it first opened its doors, purchased 3 minibuses that they needed to transport students and their children. It's a pregnant and parenting teen school, and the buses have to be fitted with car seats and everything else. They were able to purchase those buses with the CSP funds. It was a majority of their grant use. Carrying out community engagement activities, which include staff recruitment. There's a little caveat that you can't buy promo items with the CSP funds, but all of the recruitment activities are good. Other appropriate non-sustained costs relating to opening, replicating, or expanding high-quality charter schools when such costs cannot be met from other sources. So we've had some schools creatively use that to ensure they have the right people at the startup in the first year, year and a half of their school. Next slide. They're very clear as can I go to construction except for what I mentioned before as far as retrofitting an existing building to meet code. Our application, there's other little restrictions. Again, our allowable cost guide gives you a pretty good idea of what you cannot spend the money on. Our application, what we've signed up for, is a contract with the U.S. Department of Education. We're held accountable for everything we committed to in the grant, including managing costs and ensuring that costs meet all the federal requirements. And those of you who've been in this space for a while understand that overhead of managing federal funds. We are the pass-through, and anything you don't do right means we didn't do it right, and we're the ones who are ultimately going to be penalized for it. So we do try to make sure that schools' budgets make sense and meet all the federal funding requirements. Funding cannot be redirected for other uses. You can't, for example, use part of your funds to compensate a public school for services that it provides to you. So it's kind of a line that the feds have drawn. And unfortunately for virtual schools, they are not eligible to apply for this program. Next slide. We've been tried to be very clear about this to applicants. This is a competitive grant process. We designed the rubric. We had to have the rubric approved by U.S. Department of Education. And based on that rubric, we hire third-party review personnel, people who are not us, not Bloom, not really connected, except with some people we just have known. So we actually Bloom has really no say in whether a grant scores well or not. It's based on you to meet the requirements of the rubric, and it's based on our independent reviewers to score your application based on that rubric and provide a score to us. So we can't guarantee that the proposal will result in funding, and because we're at the end of our grant and we have about $2.4 million left, depending on the number of applicants and how many applicants score well, we will have to, this is where we do have some ability to manage. We'll have to decide how much proportionally each school would receive based on their grant applications. So we put in big bold letters, read all the request for application documents carefully and be certain that you tell your story well and clearly. Some of the reviewers are Idaho folks. Some of the reviewers are people who've been in the charter sector for many, many years. They may not be in Idaho. So it's imperative that you do not assume that the reviewers know much about you. They might, but don't assume it, because we assign we have a third-party person who assigns the applications out to the different reviewers. We don't have a say in that, and at the end of the day, your documents must basically stand on their own. So that's the big bold letters.
Thanks, Mark. That's awesome. Again, I'm just going to remind everyone, you guys are muted. So if you want to ask any questions as we're going, please just type them into the chat. We did share out the link to the RFA document that is hosted on our website. We also have the allowable cost guide is on our website underneath the technical assistance page. And Mark mentioned the rubric. We're going to go over that in a moment, is located inside the RFA document. All right, so this is a slide just to let you guys know that we are using a portion of the funding for technical assistance for state level activities. Some of you on this webinar have already participated in some of those. So we have used this funding for capacity building for new schools, educators, and community members, support for the Idaho Public Charter School Commission and other authorizers, developing innovative practices and instructional models to share across school settings, focus groups with stakeholders and town hall style meetings for sharing findings, which some of you have already participated in, research study to evaluate impact of charter schools on student achievement. And then we also have various technical assistance workshops with state and national experts. We do have one coming up on April 13th, which is the civil rights event. So you can check out our events page on our website to sign up for that. All right, so next we're going to go over eligible applicants and what peer reviewers look for. Next slide. As Mark said, this is a competitive grant process. We do have rigorous third-party peer review process. Bloom will only fund high-quality plans. The first thing is that you must have an approved charter petition from a state-sanctioned public charter school authorizer. If you do not have that, you will not be able to submit your application because you will need a letter of good standing from your authorizer. Applicants are expected to submit proposals that are high quality and meet the definitions that we outlined previously for startup, replication, or expansion. And again, that third-party peer review process, please don't assume they know your school. Next slide. So here we have those definitions again. So these are the types of sub-grants that we award. Again, you must be approved by a state-sanctioned charter school authorizer. So a new charter school is approved and in planning year or first year of operation. So it's a new LEA. Replication of a high-quality charter school is open a new charter school or campus under an existing LEA charter agreement based on the educational model of an existing high-quality charter school. And as Mark mentioned, Idaho Arts is an example of this. Expansion of a high quality charter school, significantly increase enrollment or add one or more grades to a high quality charter school. And Compass, who is in our first round, is a nice example of this. And all of the grants that were awarded previously, if you want to read their narratives, they are available on our website as well. And when I see Kristen posted the link to the civil rights event in the chat, so if you guys are interested in signing up for that. All right, so getting a little a deeper dive into the definition for high quality for startup school, we're definitely looking for the evidence of a committed board of trustees, a quality instructional leader, demonstrated ability to attract, recruit, retain top teaching talent, a sustainable business plan and evidence of market demand for the school, a well-conceived facility plan, and an innovative and effective learning model that meets the needs of disadvantaged and or rural students. We will cover this in even more detail during the mandatory training that we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. So hopefully you guys are signed up for that 2-hour mandatory training where we follow the rubric and you'll see how these definitions match up to what's being asked for from applicants. Next slide. I think the controls are hiding the last bullet point, but that's okay. So definition of replication and expansion for high quality for schools currently in operation. So again, evidence of strong academic results, above state average growth and proficiency on the ISAT, no significant issues identified by the authorizer. So again, you're going to need a letter of good standing from your authorizer, even if you're a startup school. And we'll go over that in the mandatory training, how that letter of good standing works, but you will not be able to submit an application if you don't have that. So again, the no significant issues in student safety, school finance, operations, or compliance. Success in significantly increasing student achievement, including graduation rates. And we also look at the subgroups defined by ESSA. So that's economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, Hispanic, and ELL. Good standing with authorizer and lenders, as I was just giving more detail about. Evidence of a student wait list, so that's going to show us demand. Evidence of strong and stable leadership and governance, which is essential for any school. Next slide. So what peer reviewers look for, we like to point out these bolded words here: demonstrate, describe, explain, identify, justify, outline. So as you go through the rubric, you'll see those words. You'll need to answer each one of those sections, and you'll see when you look through the rubric, and we'll go in more depth in the mandatory training, that you need to have an answer for every section. The rubric is designed so that you need to have an answer for every section. If you leave something or miss something out, or miss something, you're not going to get to the minimum 85 score. Applicants need to argue to the reader the reasons why they have specifically chosen a course of action, why that is directly in alignment with the vision, mission, and overarching goals and learning targets for the school. And again, going to say it again, don't assume that the peer reviewers are aware of your school and the great things that you're trying to achieve. You're going to need to demonstrate, describe, explain, identify, justify, and outline. Next slide. So again, this is just a quick overview of the rubric and the points assigned for each one of those sections that I just mentioned. There are priority points. We'll go over those in a second, but you would refer to the request for applications document to get to the rubric, and you'll see each of the sections A through J of what we're focusing on and what you should focus on as an applicant, making sure that you're getting the maximum points for each one of those sections. So we have, your grant project goals, educational philosophy, instructional practices and curriculum, teaching and learning, academic achievement standards, student demand and community local support, effectively serving all students, staffing and professional development plan, financial management and monitoring plan, board capacity and governance structure, and school leadership and management. So I don't know if we have a slide for the priority points, but go to the next slide. No. So the priority points are given out for high school, serving more than 50% of educationally disadvantaged, and then if the school is a rural school as defined by the definition we have posted on our website. So you'll have to go out there to read that. I don't have that memorized. If you have any questions at any time, you can always contact me at grantscsp at bloom.org. And then if you have questions now, you can type them into the chat. All right, so next section is our partners in our CSP consortium. This has definitely been a partnership with other organizations around the state and federally, right? So the Office of Innovation and Improvement is where the CSP grants are given out from. So Anna Hinton is their director now. She is a new, well, I guess maybe not so new anymore. Time is all blending together. But she is currently the director of the CSP program. Next slide. Yep, Idaho State Board of Education, which you guys are all familiar with. They are our partner in this as well. Next slide. As well as the Idaho Public Charter School Commission. Next slide. The Idaho State Department of Education. Michelle Clement Taylor is the school choice coordinator for the state. And so if you're, I don't think anyone is new joining us, but if someone's listening to this recording later on and you haven't gone to the Charter Start 101 workshop, that is where you start this whole process with Michelle Clement Taylor, and you can contact her for more information on how to even start thinking about starting a charter school. That's your first place to start. Next slide. All right, so we're going to do a timeline reminder, and we do have some time for Q&A. So I don't see any questions in the chat so far, so we'll just go to the next slide, do the timeline reminder. Today we're doing the Introductory Technical Assistance webinar. Thank you very much for coming. The RFP is opening Wednesday, April 13th. Oh, and we forgot to change this slide. The mandatory training is going to be on the 12th, not the 11th. So that'll be virtual and on demand, but it is mandatory that you attend. So we'd like to see that you've registered for that, and that we are checking to see who's actually attending that. It is mandatory. It is 2 hours long, and we hopefully, Kristen, if you can pop the link for folks to register if they haven't registered for that. The RFP is closing on Friday, May 13th, again at 5 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And then once that closes, I go through a quick document check. And then Mark will go through a secondary document check just to make sure that we have everything that you needed. You know, I like to say that you didn't upload a picture of your cat instead of a budget. We go through those documents and make sure they're real before we pass them on to peer reviewers. If something's missing, I will contact you immediately. So you need to be available that day if I'm going through and checking, or whenever you submit. If you submit before that, I'll be contacting you if I have questions or if there's something missing. And then those applications get passed on to the peer reviewers, and then they have a couple of weeks to get that done. So they'll finalize those peer reviews June 3rd, and then management will review what the peer reviewers have given us. We'll see who scored high enough. We'll go through that process to see award amounts. And then Terry will notify schools via a personal note, and the official notice of awards will be June 20th. Before that, though, if you are awarded, you'll immediately have 3 emails, one from Terry, one from me, and one from Kristen, giving you some next steps, what to do if you've been awarded. You'll need to schedule an individual completeness check with a budget training. And so again, that's also mandatory if you're awarded. And then the money will begin to be dispersed to subrecipients July 1st. And then again, as Mark said, all grant funds must be spent by September 30th, 2023. So I'm going to open it up for any questions. We want to go to the next slide. I think it's just applications due Friday, May 13th. Mark, did you want to add anything? Did I skip anything?
No, I think you got it. Again, the next mandatory training will go into more detail and will probably be helpful to you if you haven't done this before. So we'll see you then. And yep, the timeline. Pay attention to the timeline and the deadlines. It moves really fast. You'll find. But looking forward to having you participate in the process.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. Again, you can email anytime, grantscsp@bloom.org. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Kristen, for your help putting this on. And we'll see you guys on the 12th. Thanks. Oh, I do see one question just came in. We can stop recording.
Oh, I can answer that question. It's not